Why pie menus never became the default? Radial design in a linear world. Okay, we've never seen this channel before. I'm game.
Welcome to Interface Studies. My name is Saleh. On general-purpose computers, interaction is effectively standardized. Most
Unless your name's,
software assumes the same pairing: a keyboard for symbolic input and a mouse or trackpad for pointing. Across operating systems and applications, the pattern repeats. You move a pointer, a menu opens,
Sure.
and options appear in a vertical list. This arrangement is so deeply embedded in operating systems, accessibility layers, and interface toolkits that it rarely feels like a choice. It presents itself as neutral, natural, and inevitable. We experience it simply as how computers...
Yeah, every toolkit is built around lists of items. You could do other things. It's just usually not something supported out of the box, and usually it's not something people even know how to interact with, right? Like, you do sometimes see radial menus, but usually that's going to be in a game, right? Like, Ratchet and Clank, for example, you usually have, like, a radial menu for picking your weapons. Various other games have radial menus, but for, like, general desktop interaction, there are radial options out there, but they're not standard in anything. At least I can't think of anything where it's standard.
work. Within this environment, choices are overwhelmingly organized as linear lists.
Where's my hamburger?
Menus drop down, commands stack vertically, and sidebars and ribbons and panels all rely on the same logic. We scroll, scan, and select in straight lines so frequently that linearity itself fades into the background. On the other side, radial menus, often called pie menus, organize the same choices differently. Instead of stacking options, they distribute them around a central point. Instead of scanning top to bottom,
And you can, I'm sure he's going to go into this, you can make the argument that this is more efficient because your distance from the center to any option is going to be equal. Whereas if you're in a list system, let's say this is at the bottom of the list, that's going to be further to get to than, say, your copy.
User selects by direction. These menus are not obscure experiments. They appear in weapon wheels in games, marking menus in professional tools, stylus-based systems, and so on.
Right.
Many users have encountered them without ever naming them. Like switching weapons in GTA,
There you go.
issuing commands in The Sims, or using marking menus in tools like Maya.
Yeah, Blender does the same thing as well, I guess, yeah.
What matters is not that radial menus exist, but that they remain marginal in everyday software. Despite decades of evidence that they can outperform linear menus in specific conditions, they are confined to niches: games, creative software, and expert tools. General-purpose desktop and mobile interfaces continue to default to...
I thought those were embedded into the video until I saw them move when I did that.
lists. The question then is not whether radial menus work, but why their advantage failed to translate into broader adoption.
My guess is sort of prior experience, right? Like, somebody needs to be the first person that ships a major environment with a radial menu, and then everyone else will be like, oh, radial menus might be good. But if nobody does it, nobody is willing to take that leap and try it out.
At first glance, the answer appears simple: trade-offs. A closer look shows something more structural.
Also, you're going to be the one system out, so if you do something weird, it's going to be harder to learn your system.
Early technical constraints shaped interface toolkits. Toolkits shaped habits. Habits hardened into expectations.
Right.
And over time...
Right, like if your entire experience, like computing, is with lists, even considering that something might be better, it's like, well, I'm used to this, so why would I do it?
Those expectations became invisible standards. The dominance of linear menus is not just a story about efficiency. It's a story about how defaults form and how difficult they are to undo. Computer history is full of nuance, but the earliest documented circular, cursor-centered menu appears in the Pixie system in 1969, and later in research at the University of Waterloo explored related radial layouts. In 1986, Mike Gallagher and
What
Don
the fuck is
Hopkins
playing in the background?
jointly arrived at angle-driven context menu. The selection was defined by the angle, an optionally distance, from a central origin, all passed as parameters to a command, with a mouse click triggering an item or submenu. Human-computer interaction research has long examined how people move towards targets on...
Even outside of computers, we're used to reading elements from one side to the other, and usually go top to bottom. So the PC analogy translates well to other real-world experiences. That's true. But also keep in mind that most applications are built for left-to-right readers, right? Left to right readers. You usually don't have interfaces... Like, you have typing systems that are modified for right-to-left readers, but the interface itself is still built around left to right. So you can compartmentalize an interaction system different from the way you're used to interacting and reading text.
On a screen. One of the most influential models is Fitts' law. It describes how movement time increases as targets become smaller or farther away. In practical terms, layout is never neutral. Geometry directly affects speed, accuracy, and effort. Linear menus create a familiar pattern. Items are stacked vertically, so the further an option sits from the cursor, the longer it takes to reach.
Right.
Each item is also relatively narrow, leaving little tolerance for imprecision. Selecting the wrong item above or below the intended one is a common and well-documented error. Anyone who has scrolled...
I literally did this earlier today playing Silk Song, where I selected Biowater instead of Putrefied Ducks. I literally have an example on video in the last few hours.
...in a long font list in Word or Illustrator has felt this friction accumulate. Radial menus recognize the same choices. Options sit in equal distance from a central point, and selection depends primarily on direction rather than precise position. The interaction becomes a short, directional gesture rather than a careful traversal.
The concern you have with radial menus is if you have these be too small, they become very annoying to use, right? Accidentally, you know, oh, it's an angle like this instead of directly what it needs to be, which menu is it going to go to, right? This can certainly happen with poorly programmed menus.
But this does not mean radial menus universally faster. Their advantage appears under specific conditions. When the number of options is limited and when the same choices are used repeatedly. Photoshop could not replace its hundreds of commands with a single radial menu without collapsing usability. Controlled studies comparing pie menus and linear menus show consistent results. Radial menus reduce selection time, lower error rates, and improve performance as users gain familiarity. These benefits are real, but conditional. They emerge most clearly in bounded choice environments, not in interfaces designed to explore large command vocabularies at once. One of the most less visible strengths of radial menus lies in how they support learning over time. When users first encounter them, behavior resembles list usage. Users pause, read labels, and make deliberate selections. But with repetition, something changes.
Right, it becomes more of a muscle memory thing.
Direction begins to carry meaning. An upward movement comes to stand for one action, a diagonal flick for another. The interaction shifts from visual recognition to motor memory. Cognitive load drops, because scanning is replaced by recall. Experienced Maya users often trigger commands so quickly that the menu never appears on screen. Only the gesture is performed. A critical detail is that novice and expert behavior share the same physical action. The movement used while reading labels is identical to the movement later executed from memory. Learning happens.
I just realized the radial menu has a finite number of viable sections. A drop-down menu can be extended infinitely with scrolling. This is true, but you can have sub-radial menus. So you can have a radial menu that opens a radial menu.
Happens through repetition, not through switching to an entirely different interaction system. This differs from keyboard shortcuts, where menu use does not teach the shortcut itself. Clicking Save does not reinforce Control S or Command S. A marking menu does. But radial menus do not remove learning curves. They reshape them. They favor environments where repetition is high and where the users are willing to invest in mastery. So why linear menus became the default? Linear menus dominate modern software not because they are always optimal, but because they aligned with the conditions under which graphical interfaces first emerged. Early systems prioritized familiarity. Office software borrowed heavily from paper metaphors, documents, folders, and lists. These forms were recognizable and reassuring, even if they were not always efficient. There were also technical reasons. Early hardware made rectangular layouts easier to render and manage than circular ones. As graphical systems matured, software frameworks...
You never really need to have like a perfect circle anyway. That's yeah.
Accessibility technologies, documentation practices, and training material all assumed linear menus as the norm. Once toolkits made lists trivial to implement, anything else became custom, fragile, and expensive.
Right.
Windows menus, Mac menus, and HTML select elements all encode this bias directly into infrastructure. Once these assumptions were embedded, abandoning them became difficult. Linear menus also...
You can also do a radial system with a grid. There is also that. So you can kind of hack them into list-based systems. Baldur's Gate uses radial selection of everything combat-related on controller. I've not done controller. That makes sense, though.
Offer genuine strengths. They scale well to large numbers of commands. They support dense text, searching, and predictable reading order. They integrate cleanly with screen readers and accessibility tooling. Their ribbon, as we saw in the previous video, exists because Word and Excel expose hundreds of commands that must remain visible and searchable. Radial menus, by contrast, trade scale and exhaustiveness for speed and motor memory. Their marginal position reflects real constraints, not a simple failure of imagination.
Well, lists are also not great for massive amounts of items either, because then you need to track them down. In that case, usually search-based systems end up sort of like coming out ahead. You can have radial menus, or you could add rings to your radial menu. Same number of sections, but outer rings are less frequently interacted with. That's also true. You can do that, yeah.
And since we talked about games, we have to talk about them in a bit more detail. Video games offer a revealing contrast because they're not bound to a single input device. Consoles rely on controllers with analog stick.
Wait, sorry, what is this? No, this footage is...
Video games offer a revealing contrast because they're not bound to a single input device. Consoles rely on controllers with analog...
Wait, this is fake footage.
A single input device. Consoles rely on
controllers... Is it? Wait, I actually don't know. Maybe it is?
With analog sticks.
Oh, no, maybe it's not.
PC games...
I'm just so confused. I just saw fucking League or whatever this with a controller. I've never seen someone try to do this. I thought the mouse movement didn't align with the stick. I didn't realize it was using the right stick. Of course, movements on... Yeah, okay. So wait, This has what? Okay, whatever. We're not gonna address League on a controller.
Consoles rely on controllers with analog sticks, while PC games often use mouse and keyboard. Despite this variation, radial menus appear consistently across both. The reason is not just stylistic preference, it is task structure. Games often demand rapid, repeated selection under time pressure. Attention must remain on the environment, and hesitation has consequences. In these conditions, directional intent matters more than precise targeting. When players must choose quickly from a small, stable set of actions, radial menus dominate. When they are browsing large, changing collections, like inventory, settings, and management screens, lists return. Analog sticks express direction naturally. Mice can approximate the same interaction through quick flicks or short strokes. Having said that,
Hey yo. Hey yo.
radials fit controllers especially well. While on the mouse and keyboard, they compete with hotkeys, number rows, and scroll wheel cycling. Even so, the same weapon wheel or command radial can survive a change in controller without losing its core logic, because what remains constant is not the device, but the need for fast, spatially anchored, and context-sensitive choice. Now, urgency is not the only context in which this pattern appears. In slower simulation and management games, radial or pie menus often emerge around selected objects. Here, the structure still suits them, a focused set of actions tied to a single target. But stylistic concerns matter more. The circular bloom of options reinforces an object-centric view. Everything you can do to this thing. This maintains a toy-like feel and keeps the inference from collapsing into flat, desktop-style lists. This helps explain why radial menus thrive in games yet remain rare in everyday software. The mouse is not hostile to radial interaction. What differs is the surrounding ecosystem, the scale and variability of available commands, the need for discoverability and documentation, accessibility constraints, entrenched platform conventions. And of course,
well, with accessibility stuff, you can also have a secondary option, right? Like you can have a list as an option there if you are not able to interact with radial menu, right? A lot of games that have a radial menu also have a list-based system.
The different nature of every computer user with limited time to develop spatial muscle memory. Where everyday tools must optimize for broad familiarity and dense information, games can afford and often benefit from interfaces that privilege speed, spatial recall, and stylistic fit over strict conformity to standard UI patterns. The story continues with touch interfaces. Their appearance offered a chance to rethink interface geometry completely. Fingers are imprecise. Directional gestures feel natural. Menus can appear directly under the point of contact. Yet,
and what did we do?
Interface
literally nothing.
Largely reinforced existing patterns. System settings, for example, still scroll vertically. Many options are included in a very long list. Mobile platforms doubled down on lists, grids, tabs, and long vertical feeds. This was not a lack of imagination necessarily. Touch interfaces prioritized discoverability, clarity, and low learning cost. They needed to support infrequent use, one-handed interaction, broad accessibility. Radial menus survived on touch only in specific contexts. Stylus-based systems, creative tools, and games. Where repetition and expertise mattered, radial structure made sense. Where scale and approachability...
Whereas with your phone, it's oftentimes... Most people don't try to, like, master their phone, like, try to become competent using their phone. It's just pick it up, use it, put it down. Well, pick it up, use it, scroll for 10 hours, and then put it down.
Dominated, lists persisted. Touch removed the mouse, but it did not remove the pressure that favors linear structure. In recent years, radial menus have seen renewed attention outside traditional research circles. Projects like Pi Menu app on Mac advocates for them not as novelties, but as first-class interface elements.
That's cool.
Practitioner discussions highlight their suitability for pen computing, VR, and expert workflows. Designers are no longer asking whether radial menus are better.
Oh yeah, VR hadn't even come up until now. Yeah, in VR, lists don't make any sense in VR.
Workflows.
Now it's like, oh, point at the thing you want. Now you're at a point where radial menus start making a lot more sense.
Designers are no longer asking whether radial menus are better, but where they belong. Linear menus persist because they support scale, visibility, and universality. Radial menus persist because they support speed, memory, and flow. Each encodes different assumptions about how people act and learn. Screen readers depend on linear order. A radial menu has no obvious reading sequence.
Not entirely true, because your eyes do tend to gravitate towards certain directions and certain locations based on where you're from, right? If you're someone that reads right to left, I would imagine your eyes probably gravitate in a different direction than someone who reads left to right. Also, it's going to change depending on whether you're familiar reading a digital clock, an analog clock or not. Maybe you are right that there are a bunch of different approaches to this. Okay, you know what? I'll give you that.
Emerging platforms such as spatial computing and AI-driven systems reopen questions about interface geometry without necessarily resolving them yet. In environments like Vision Pro or Meta Quest, selection often happens through gaze and pinch, where angular
Moving on.
separation matters more than pixel distance. Radial structures may reappear. We've seen that with Tilt Brush, for example, which is a room-scale 3D painting virtual reality app.
I'm not going to paint like that, that's for
Linear
sure.
and radial interfaces embody different models of human behavior. Lists assume scanning, reading, categorizing, and searching. Radial structures assume movement, direction, repetition, and memory. The main point I'm trying to make in this video is that while acknowledging the difference in these interface elements and the fact that neither is inherently superior, interface history does not show a failure to adopt better designs. It shows how early constraints solidify into permanent structures. Once a form becomes infrastructure, it disappears from view.
A lot of the UI design stuff that we have, you can trace it back all the way to what the fuck was Steve Jobs' company when he got kicked out of Apple? I'm blanking on the name. Fuck. Next Step. Yeah. Yeah, a lot of a modern UI design concept you can trace directly back to Next Step. I'm pretty sure context menus came from Next Step. I might be wrong on that, but I'm pretty sure they did.
And stops being questioned. The point is not to replace lists with circles, but to recover choice where habit has erased it. When designing interfaces, it is worth asking, is this a space for breadth, search, and scale, or for speed, repetition, and flow? The answer will rarely demand a single form, but it should at least make the geometry of our defaults a conscious decision rather than something we inherit.
That was a good video. I like that. We don't tend to watch a lot of design stuff. Yeah, what do you mean that didn't get skipped? We watch almost every video you send. It's very rare that we don't.